Hello, hello, hello. Happy Saturday, everyone. It's so great to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Audrey. I am the dietitian for the Celiac Disease Center at the University of Chicago. And that wonderful woman who you see in that wonderful kitchen right there is Lindsay Yeakel. She's our Celiac Disease Education Coordinator. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi, Audrey. Hi, everybody. Yes, I am the education coordinator. I also happen to be a classically trained chef, and I have celiac disease as well. So I do these cooking events. I actually do them every month, but only quarterly or they live like this one. The others are pre-recorded and they end up on our YouTube channel. So I think everybody that's joining today did receive an email with the recipe, a couple of additional recipes, a link to the YouTube channel, all of that. So that's where this is being recorded, and it will be on the YouTube channel within a few days next week.
Hooray.
So, yeah.
So in case anyone missed it, please access the YouTube recording in a few days. We'd love to send it to you guys. And before we get started, just to let you all know, please, if you have any questions or any comments, please put them in the chat. Please do not unmute yourself. Just put them in the chat box and we will get to address them. I will be reading through them. I'll get it and I will pose questions to Lindsay as we're going through it. But in the meantime, please sit back and relax and enjoy. Or if you're at your kitchen table, get to washing your hands. What are we standing around here for?
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna work on the cutout cookies. So this is a recipe that actually I've been using for years. I would say roughly around 2015 is when I started using this recipe. And it's actually by somebody called Bake It 350. And she has a blog and it's bakeit350.net. And this was back then a traditional gluten-containing recipe that I ended up using for gluten-free cookies and have had a lot of success with. And so that's the one I'm going to be making. And in the email, I did say I'd have a couple of the steps done in advance, and I'll still talk through those. I'll explain what's happening, but you'll see that I kind of had to cheat in a couple of areas and make some of these earlier so that I could get you all the steps. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I guess I'll go ahead and get started. So the recipe calls for 3 cups of flour. I personally use King Arthur flour. There's lots of different ones you can use. That's just the one that I like the best. And this particular King Arthur flour does already have xanthan gum in it. There are some that you can get that don't, but this one does. And I find that that's helpful. I don't have to add in xanthan gum. For those of you who have been cooking gluten-free for a long time, you're familiar with xanthan gum. And that's what we use to help get that elasticity in our gluten-free items that we use with gluten-free flour that regular flour has. So 3 cups of my gluten-free flour. All right. And then the next thing that the recipe calls for is 2 teaspoons of baking. We're going to put that right in with the flour. We're going to mix it together. Okay.
Lindsay, we just had someone on the chat say, what a beautiful, clean, and clutter-free kitchen.
Oh.
I said, that's what I said.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. I think when you're a trained chef, the setup of your kitchen and the lack of clutter and all that becomes important. It's kind of how you're trained when you're trained to be a chef, is to keep everything neat and tidy.
Keep your station clean.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Also letting everyone know the class is slated for an hour, but if we have time, we'll obviously go a little longer or shorter depending on what's needed, but plan for between 45 minutes to an hour.
Yes. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is back here, kind of behind me. I apologize. This is a real kitchen that we're working in. So back here is where my mixer is. I'm going to go ahead and put in a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks of butter is equal to a cup. And this is still cold. I still want it cold. I don't want it softened. I don't want it melted. I don't want any of that. It needs to stay cold. That helps with the cutting out of these. It's going to get noisy. I apologize. Okay, so I just break that up a little bit. And then the next thing the recipe calls for is a cup of sugar. And I'm going to put that in.
Lindsay,
Yep.
do you recommend King Arthur for all your baking?
Typically, yes. I find I have the most success with the King Arthur flour. It's as close to a traditional gluten-containing flour as I've found, and I've used a lot of them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we put that in, and then that's going to help cream the butter and sugar together. It's going to get noisy again.
We had someone just comment in the chat, is that the 1-for-1 flour? And no, we are using King Arthur today. But Lindsay, do you have any experience with the 1-to-1 flour?
I have used it. I do like it as well. This is my preference, but that one works well too. And for this recipe, it probably would work just fine. Yeah.
I know Dr. Verma is a fan of the 1-to-1, 1-for-1 flour. So that is a recommended flour by our beloved Dr. Verma. Oh, the King Arthur 1-for-1. Oh, interesting.
Oh my God. It's giving me a hard time. Okay, I'm going to come back over here just for a minute because I want to show you what this looks like. I know you can't see it over there, but we're just creaming together the butter and the sugar right now. It's very basic. You can see can you see? No.
Yes, there we go. Very nice.
And it's coming together. It's, creaming together. So that's what we want. We give it a scrape. And then I'm going to mix it just a bit more to make sure it's well combined.
To clarify, Lindsay, is that the King Arthur 1-for-1 flour?
It's this one that I'm using. It might be. I have to double check.
Yeah,
I'll double check it. I'll follow up with an email after and let everybody know the exact King Arthur that I'm using.
Perfect.
Okay, so into that we're going to add an egg, just 1 egg. And then also we're going to add vanilla extract and almond extract. The almond extract, it's not necessary, you don't have to have it, but it is kind of the flavor of these cookies. They're still fine, delicious, really without, but the vanilla or the almond adds kind of just a really nice flavor to them that feels kind of special, I think, compared to just the vanilla alone. Again, you can do the vanilla alone, but the almond extract really, really bumps it up, I think. Okay, so the vanilla is 3/4 teaspoon. And then the almond is 1/2 teaspoon.
Lindsay, Liz in Oregon has a question. Do I need that big mixer? I have the old handheld little mixer where you shove things in. Would either of those work?
Sure, yes, that would work too. Years ago, when I first was diagnosed, which was 17 years ago, I was there wasn't a lot of information out there about how to bake gluten-free. So I did a lot of things to figure it out myself. And the one thing I learned early on was that you needed xanthan gum. And back then there weren't these pre-made mixes that already had xanthan gum in. So I made my first baked item, and I put the xanthan gum in, and I was still experimenting to figure out how much and all of that, and found that I used too much xanthan gum, and it, like, in my handheld mixer, it started to crawl right up the beaters, up into the mix. It was a mess. And so at that point I said, that's it, I need a stand mixer. Now, of course, I know better. I know how to use xanthan gum better and all of that. So I don't really need the stand mixer, but 17 years ago, I thought I did. So that's why I have it. And I've had it that long, by the way. That's a KitchenAid mixer that I've had for 17 years. So they do last a long time, but yes, the handheld one should be fine. Okay. So now we're going to scrape this down again. Just to make sure it's all really well mixed. Okay, and into that, we're going to add in our flour and our baking powder mix that we already have, just a little at a time.
Lindsay, I have a question actually. What do you feel like are some common mistakes that people make going gluten-free when making these specific types of cookies?
What's that?
Sorry, I said, what are some common, you feel like mistakes or, things that can be tricky to do when you're making these sugar cookies gluten-free?
I think that, well, I'm going to show you one of them that I think is, and something that people would question and think was wrong, and I'm going to show you that shortly. But I think that overworking things and adding too much warmth from your hands and not keeping things cold enough, I think, is one of the big issues that people have with cutout cookies, pie crusts, biscuits, all of those kind of things where you kind of need that butter to stay cold and hard so that things hold their shape better. I think that's one of the biggest issues that people have with gluten-free. It's kind of overworking things and making them too warm, really.
Interesting.
I'm going to show you another one in a minute. Let me just finish this mix and then I'll show you. Okay, so now I can show you the other one that is going to probably surprise people when I get this out of here. You're going to see it's actually quite dry. It's a very dry mix. The cookies don't end up tasting dry or feeling dry, but the mix does start out dry and we sort of have to work it together. Let's show you how to get it out of here. I did put a little bit of flour on my counter. so that it doesn't stick. Okay, so you can see it's very crumbly, just sort of crumbled everywhere, but that's okay. That's what we want. And we're going to work it together by hand. So we sort of press it together like this. And I know for most people, this probably looks a little scary. It will come together.
For some people who joined a little bit later, we have Lindsay Yeakel, our celiac disease education coordinator, and also certified chef, who is teaching us how to make sugar-free, good grief, gluten-free sugar cookies. Not sugar-free, definitely not sugar-free, but definitely pay attention because Lindsay, of all people, knows what she's doing.
Anyhow, so there you go. You can see it's all come together. So now what I do is I roll it out, and we're going to talk about my rolling pin. My rolling pin is wooden, but that we have to discuss because if you're making gluten-free and you already own a wooden rolling pin that you've used for gluten items, you don't want to use it for your gluten-free items. You want to have a different rolling pin that's never been used for gluten-containing items if it's wooden. Wood is porous, very hard to clean. So I have one that I got 17 years ago when I was diagnosed. It's never been used for gluten, and so it's safe. The other thing you can do, there's marble rolling pins and there's other silicone rolling pins, things like that. So you can use those for either, and then you can wash it in between, but wooden, can't share those. So I just wanted to make note of that nobody's thinking that it's safe to use their gluten-filled rolling pin for gluten-free, but it's not. So we roll it out, and I roll it out to about between 1/4 and 3/8 thickness. I like them a little bit thicker because I think the cookie itself then stays softer on the inside. So it cooks and it's still tender, I think that's what I would call it. And I prefer that myself. I like it a little bit thicker so that it's still nice and soft. Let me just roll it out. Are there any other questions coming in?
Not yet.
Ask about even something other than cutout cookies. Might be able to help.
I am personally enamored with your ability to roll such a smooth, soft, gluten-free dough. That's our next segment, ASMR for celiac.
There you go. So I just happen to have 3 cookie cutters here. I have a tree, a snowflake, and an ornament. Just the ones that I grabbed. Push them in. Loosen them out. And then I put them on the sheet pan. And my sheet pan is lined with parchment paper. I actually did make these earlier today when I was working on the steps of this, getting some of the steps done in advance. And I didn't put parchment paper on my sheet pan, and they did fine, surprisingly. So I don't suggest it. I just was lucky. I was out of parchment paper, but it worked. You can do the silk hat mats too, the silicone mats. Those work really well for gluten-free also. But yeah, it's definitely suggested that you line the tray so they don't stick. And on these sheet pans, I usually can get about 8. They're cutout cookies, so they don't spread. So about 8 seems to fit on here nicely, of the size that I have. So you can see it's very workable dough.
I'm not sure if this is jumping the gun or not yet, Lindsay, but out of curiosity, do you recommend any specific frosting for these kinds of cookies?
So with the email that I sent everybody with this recipe, I also sent links to two types of icing that I like. And it depends on what your taste is or what the finished product look is that you want. One of them was royal icing. And royal icing is the kind that you see in the really high end, perfectly decorated, smooth cut out cookies. So it's a thinner consistency and it kind of, you run it in place. You build outlines around and then you sort of flood in the icing. Then you let it sit and it hardens. So that's royal icing and they're beautiful when you make those. Then the other is a buttercream. And buttercream is softer, lighter finish. You can use different tips on a pastry type bag and do different looks with that. You can just use a knife and just spread it on one color, done. So you have different options as far as that goes, but I did send two different icing links, and we're not going to do the icing today because I think everybody's capable of that. The important part is getting the right cookie base. The other thing you can do as far as icing goes is you can go to the store and you can buy one of the cans of icing that's gluten-free, and you can do that. So you don't even have to make the icing yourself if you don't want. So you've got options as far as that goes, and I think everybody can kind of do that part themselves. But I put two links in there to the ones that I really like and I use the most.
Wow.
Yeah. So then what we do, once we've cut out the cookies, that first tray, it goes into the freezer. You put it in the freezer for 10 minutes and then it goes into the oven. So I already have one in the freezer. This is where I sort of cheated the system. So here's my pan that was in the freezer for 10 minutes, probably a little bit more than 10 minutes. So this will go in the oven then after it's frozen, and that helps hold its shape when it's baking. So this will go in the oven for 10 to 12 minutes, and because it was in the freezer a little bit longer than 10 minutes, I'll probably have to try 11 minutes on that. And so what you do when you're making these is I suggest one pan in the oven at a time. So it slows the process down, but I think the end result is better if your oven's not crowded. And what you can do while that's in for 10 minutes, you can put your other sheet pan that's ready in the freezer for 10 minutes. And then you just keep that cycle going. So this one that I just finished, I'll put in the freezer for 10 minutes. These will be done. And I can load another sheet pan and just sort of rotate everything. So you kind of keep it all moving. Now, if you've got little people helping, which is always fun, the process is obviously not going to be such a specific rotation necessarily because you've got people helping and you might be filling trays far faster than they're baking because you've got multiple hands helping. So obviously things change when you've got the kids involved, but it's a lot of fun for kids. Kids love doing cutout cookies, and for somebody that's gluten-free to be able to enjoy cutout cookies at the holidays, it's pretty special. So have them help.
Lindsay, we have a few people asking if the emails were sent out already with the recipes. Can't seem to find them anywhere.
So they were sent out to everybody who had registered by this morning. Oftentimes the emails that I send end up in people's junk folders, so check there. If you registered after, I don't know, 10 o'clock this morning, then you probably didn't receive it. And what I do is after the fact on Monday, I'll go through and see who registered after the last batch was sent this morning, and I'll send those. But if you did register before this morning and you didn't receive it, check your junk. It's probably there.
Or let us know. But either way,
Okay.
anyone who didn't receive an email beforehand should receive one this coming Monday.
Yes, correct. I'm just popping this into the freezer. Sorry, my refrigerator's over off the camera. And then I'm just going through and I'm cutting more out. No rhyme or reason. I just rotate through the different cookie cutters that I have. If you have one that does what that one did and just stays on the counter, you can use the spatula and just gently slide it under and pop it out. And then what I do, as far as all the pieces that are left around the cutouts, I'll combine them back together and I will re-roll, and then I will cut out another batch of them. Once you get to, I don't know, maybe your second re-roll, that's it. It gets too dry. It gets too hard to work with, too crumbly if you re-roll too many times. So 2 re-rolls is about it for me. Whatever's left, then you just get rid of. And there won't be much left after 2 re-rolls. So I just keep cutting them out. And then these freeze really nicely, either just like this before you put any icing on, but they also freeze really nicely with icing on too. Both the buttercream and the royal icing freeze really, really well. So if you want to make them in advance or an event later, should be perfectly fine to do that. They go really well in the freezer, and then they just thaw shortly. It doesn't take long to thaw them, and
Lindsay, where did you find the 1-to-1 King Arthur or whatever King Arthur flour you're using today?
Okay, so I actually must confess, I do not live in the Chicago area. And so a store that I would say that I got mine in, you wouldn't have there. So I know that oftentimes Costco and BJ's and the big warehouse stores actually have large bags of it, and that's the best price. And those are all around the country. I believe Whole Foods has the King Arthur flour, which is everywhere in the country. That's it. I'm not as familiar with the Chicago ones. Audrey, you might actually be able to help more with. Have you seen King Arthur in some of your stores there?
Yes. So, and actually someone else just commented, Woodman's, Jewel, Fruitful Yield, they all have them as well.
Okay, I was gonna say Jewel, but I wasn't positive, so I didn't want to throw it out there.
Yes. And I can look for some others too.
Nowadays, it's getting pretty easy to find.
Oh yeah, they have it everywhere around here. Target, Whole Foods, Jewel, Mariano's, Walmart, Target. Seems like Mariano's, Target, and Whole Foods are the big go-tos for this flour.
Good.
We've got someone hosting a party tomorrow and she wanted to make these.
Perfect.
Oh, and how thick do you roll them again, Lindsay?
I do between 1/4 and 3/8. I like them a little bit thicker. I like that they stay a little bit softer. If they're too thin, they get crispier, and that's just not my preference. If you prefer your cookie crispier, roll them thinner. But I probably lean a little bit more toward the 3/8 just because I like a soft cookie personally. But yeah, whatever works for you. They just get crispier if they're thinner. That's all. Okay, so I'm just gathering this up. Checking my clock. We still have about 4 minutes on that batch. So I would gather this all up, re-roll it, cut out more. And then after you do that batch, one more re-roll and cut out, and then I would get rid of it. It just gets too crumbly and dry. Okay. What other questions can I answer for anybody while we're kind of waiting? You don't have to sit and watch me re-roll this and all that every batch, but I'd love to be able to answer some more questions, baking questions, other things that you're baking, cooking, whatever. Just put some questions in that chat, and I'll see if I can help answer them. I've been gluten-free for 17 years. I'm a classically trained chef, so I do know a good bit about cooking and baking.
While people think of them and put them in the chat, Lindsay, I was actually wondering myself, as a trained chef and someone who's been gluten-free for 17 years, have you ever hosted a holiday party of any kind and catered to both gluten-containing and gluten-free people? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah, so definitely I have. But to be honest, I find if I'm the one that's hosting the event, I typically just make everything gluten free. If I'm hosting, if I'm the one that's making all the food, it's likely to all be gluten free. Very rarely am I going to make things that contain gluten in my own house. Also important to note, I have 2 children, one of which is gluten free as well. So there's 4 of us in total, and so we're half and half. Half of us are gluten free and half of us aren't. And even in our normal day-to-day lives, when I make dinner for everybody, it's gluten free. So I tend to go that route when I'm the one in charge of the food. It's obviously different whenever you're going to somebody else's house that's hosting, and you're the one that eats gluten free and the other people don't. In that scenario, oftentimes I'll talk to the people who are having the event, and I'll see if they know anything about gluten free, first of all, and if they are planning to make anything gluten free, if they understand how to do that. I'll have a conversation with them in advance, and then sort of determine based on that conversation how I should handle things for myself. Oftentimes, if it's an event that they're asking people to bring dishes to, I'll bring obviously something that's gluten-free that I know I can eat. If they're handling everything and I'm not super comfortable, I'll eat before I go. That's generally the easiest thing to do. Eat before you go if you're not comfortable or you're unsure. The worst thing to do is go to an event hungry where you can't eat anything, because that's when you maybe would make a mistake or take a risk that you maybe wouldn't if you weren't as hungry, things like that. So yeah, it just depends on whether I'm the host or somebody else is the host. And if somebody else has hosted gluten-free before, what they know about it, my comfort level, all of those kind of things sort of go into my decisions as far as that goes.
Awesome. And do you have a good recipe for dairy-free icing?
No, I would say I don't, strictly because I'm not dairy free. I could do some research. I can include that in a follow-up email and see what I come up with, but I don't have to eat dairy free, so it's not something that I've specifically had to look for and figure out.
I see a Betty Crocker cookie icing. It's red colored, no gluten and no dairy. So let me know if you want me to send you the link.
There you go. Okay, so what we do then, when this pan comes out, we just let it sit and cool. We don't move them, we don't do anything with them. The key is to just let them sit and cool off without any movement while they're soft, because little parts will break off of them. With my snowflake, I've got the individual little points. We don't want to risk those coming off. So we just let it sit and cool. I'm gonna grab the other sheet. It's in the freezer. We're gonna put it right into the oven. Again, 10 minutes. And the one that I just got ready goes into the freezer. And you just keep rotating through like that. So this then is ready to be rolled. I'm going to put a little bit more flour here. Not too much.
I just sent 2 links for the dairy and gluten-free icing, and for everyone's reference, I am using a site called sifter.shop, SIFTER.shop, SHOP. I found it's very helpful if you're just looking for, I know I need icing and I know it needs to be gluten-free and dairy-free. You can filter by that. Label read every time still, because you never know if there's a product in there that might, just be not labeled for manufacturing purposes. Hashtag label reading in America. But please feel free to use that site. I use it all the time. And if you have any questions about specific products, send us a MyChart message. We would love to help you answer them.
Yeah, if you're a patient. Anybody else that's not a patient, you can just email me.
Yes.
We can get the information. We have these open to people who are patients and who aren't, so. And I'm just cutting them out again, just like I did before, while these ones cool. And once these are cool, then I put them over on a cooling rack just to finish. You want to make sure they're very well cooled off before you put any icing on them. If you put the icing on when they're even the slightest bit warm, it will literally just melt off into a puddle. And icing is too much work if you're, really, you're doing the tips or you're doing the royal and flooding. It's too much work for it to melt off. You don't want that to happen. So make sure they're very cold.
Lindsay, we have someone in the chat who has been told to never measure gluten-free flour the same as regular. Like, don't scoop your measuring cup into the flour, but scoop a tablespoon or 2 at a time into the measuring cup. And don't pack, shake, etc., as gluten-free flours are often lighter weight and they pack more into the cup than regular. So you have a higher chance of your baked good being dry or crumbly. What are your thoughts?
I would agree with all of that. So because I am who I am and I move quickly, I take my flour and my measuring cup. I got my measuring cup. So the concern is things being packed in and dry, and that is a legitimate concern with gluten-free flour. So what I do is I take my measuring cup and I dig in and I fluff the flour up, loosen it so it's not packed down in there, and then I fill and gently shake. I'm going to bring this really close to the camera. You can tell just to look at it. Audrey, is that in the camera?
Yes, it is.
So you can tell just to look at it. It's light and it's fluffy. It's not packed in like that would look like. So once it's packed in, you can see this cup's not full. So if it's too packed, you would continue to fill that. But the way I did it, where I fluffed it up in the container first, that helps with that. So you definitely can do the spoon by spoon, and that's perfectly fine, and it works. It takes longer, and so somewhere along the way in my research, I realized that if I just fluff it up in that container, then scoop kind of up underneath, it's almost equal. The other thing that's actually the best way when you're baking is to use recipes where it's weighed. If you're actually weighing your flour, that's the best option. This recipe just isn't written that way, so it's not an option on this one. But any recipe where the flour is listed by weight, that's perfect, because gluten flour, gluten-free flour, it doesn't matter what it is, you want that weight. So weights really are the best way to go as far as baking goes. But this recipe doesn't work that way. It's not written that way. So anyhow, that's how I do it. Hopefully that helps.
Fluff, shake, or weigh. That's kind of the, I was thinking, like, you got to fluff the flour, shake the flour, and weigh the flour.
Yeah.
And someone else was wondering, where did you go to culinary school, and were you gluten-free then?
I went to culinary school at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, Academy of Culinary Arts. And interestingly, yes, I was gluten-free then. Part of the reason I went to culinary school was because I thought, well, if I figure out how to cook and bake and all of that traditionally, that will help me to learn how to do it gluten-free. And so that's what I did. And I went the whole way through culinary school gluten-free, where I had to do a lot of smelling and feeling as opposed to tasting things. So I learned a lot about what to look for or how things should smell. It was challenging, but my instructors were actually really supportive and really good about it. And that was right after I was diagnosed. So I went to culinary school probably about 16 years ago. And again, there just wasn't much information back then. So my instructors were very kind and let me bring things in to substitute. If we were making something with pasta, I would take in my own pasta and substitute it, things like that. So it was actually a really good experience, but yeah, it was different from the rest of the people there for sure. So this would be my last free roll. I won't do any more after this. Okay. All right. So this last little bit, I would just throw away. It's just too dry, too crumbly at this point. Not as nice for your cookies.
Goodbye, scraps.
Yes. Okay, so that's it. So I've cut them all out. I have a batch that's should be cool enough to move at this point. Let's give it a try. Yeah. So there you can see, I'm going to bring it, well, maybe one that's already cooled off. Okay, so I'm going to walk over closer to the camera. Aubrey, is that good?
Let's see. Oh, beautiful.
So you can see, and so that's about how thick I make mine.
That's
Like
a
I said,
nice thick cookie.
I like them that way. I think they're softer, and that's my preference. But again, I feel
That's
like I'm
impressive.
crispy. So they really hold the shape. I mean, it's a true cutout cookie. I'll show you one of the snowflakes too, because that's probably more impressive. So you can see it.
Wow.
It holds its shape. I mean, it's a true cutout cookie, and they taste delicious.
Great.
They really are good. Very tasty. It's a really basic recipe. I mean, you can see there were only a few ingredients, but it's a really good one. Holds its shape, tastes good. Even once you put the icing on, it still holds up to the icing, because icing adds weight to it, but they still hold up well. So yeah, it's my favorite cutout cookie. My kids have always really enjoyed it, and anybody else that we share them with always really like them. So that's it. That's our cutout cookies. Any other questions that I can answer for anybody? No, maybe not.
Doesn't look like it as of yet. Oh, we have a thank you from Jennifer. Thank you for hosting. Oh, any gingerbread recipes that you can share with us?
I think I might have one. Let me check into that. If I come across one, which I think I might have, I can include it in an email after as well.
Okay. Anne
So
also said,
recipe, what else was I including in an email? Oh,
uh,
the specific flour.
the specific flour, yes.
Okay.
Dairy-free icing, maybe?
I think you sent them that though.
Yeah, probably. Okay. Yeah, I did. Okay. And Anne said that she had good luck with Namaste gluten flour, also Krusteaz makes a gluten-free flour. How about a pizza dough?
I sort of have one, but pizza dough is it's a whole different world. I find that pizza dough and bread are two of the hardest things to make gluten-free in a way that I'm happy with. I'm pretty particular. So I would say I probably don't really have a pizza dough recipe that I feel good enough about to share, if that makes sense.
It does.
So yeah, unfortunately, it's so hard to make it like a traditional pizza crust, and that's my goal. Eventually, when I have one that's close enough, or I find somebody else that has one that's close enough, then I would be inclined to share it, because not all the recipes that I share in these cooking segments are my own. Some are, some aren't. This one's not. This is the one that's bake at 350.net. It's her recipe. So again, I'm always searching for recipes that people have already done that I like, or that I've come up with that I like. And so far, pizza crust, it's a miss for everyone that I've tried.
Bummer.
Yeah, it is.
They do make them, I think, commercially too, though. They make,
They
like,
do.
there are some in the freezer section that you can always
Yep.
purchase, but stay tuned, I guess. That'll be our next venture.
Yeah, that's right. I know the company that makes pie crust, Wholly Wholesome, they do gluten-free pie crust, which I'm pretty sure are always at Whole Foods and other places as well. They actually have a dough ball that you can buy too, a pizza one, and I think they have a pie one. Anyhow, those are pretty good. And what I like about them is you can make it yourself. Then it's literally just the dough ball ready to go. You thaw it and you form yourself. So I think that's kind of fun, especially if you're trying to include kids and you want your kids to be able to make a pizza or a pie or whatever with you. They sort of get the experience of the shaping it and the topping it and all of that, with a fairly good dough ball. It's Wholly Wholesome, and usually it's at Whole Foods. So
We
that's my
have a recommendation for Annalise Roberts, has very good gluten-free bread recipes.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out
Thanks for the recommendation.
for sure. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, nothing else anybody can think of at this point, I guess we can wrap this up. Again, I do every month, I do some sort of a cooking class, and we've got a bunch of them on YouTube already. Quarterly, I do it live like this. The next live one, I believe, is scheduled for March, and it's fruit kebabs and like a yogurt dip, and it's one where we're hoping that the kids will sort of be on camera and making theirs kind of while I'm making mine. We did a bento box one last quarter, and a lot of the kids were making them as I made mine. And then in between, I do the pre-recorded ones where it's me in this space making something that people have requested. So we do that one form or another every month, and they're always recorded and always land on YouTube. All of our events and programs are recorded and go on our YouTube channel at this point. So anything that we're doing that you either want to rewatch or you couldn't attend and you want to see, go to the YouTube channel, it'll be there. So
And
lots of
the
good stuff.
YouTube channel is titled University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center.
Yes, and everybody who's on here should have it in the email that I sent. The actual link I included in that email. So
Or will send on Monday.
Yep.
And
Okay.
also don't forget about our upcoming Family Network event on December 12th at 4 p.m. Central Time, discussing dual kitchens, learning how to set up and safely use a kitchen that handles both gluten-free and gluten-containing foods. So
And
if
we'll
you're
be here
interested
in
in
this kitchen again, talking about it. Yep.
that.
Yep,
In
yep.
this,
I'll show you how I do things, how I set things up, and all of that. Because we technically are a dual kitchen here. So this is where it'll all be demonstrated. That's Tuesday. Okay.
any other questions? Thank you for joining us again. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us. I'm glad we were able to share this great recipe from our wonderful celiac disease coordinator and chef extraordinaire, Lindsay Yeakel. Thank you again for everyone, and thank you for your time, Lindsay.
Thanks, everybody.